I guess it's time.
Hi, welcome everyone. Let me see here. Somewhere there is a good intro to using Meet Echo for a couple of you. I'm going to do the, let's do the infinite screen share here for a moment. Yes, Chrome. So I just want to show you. So this button here lets you join the queue, the mic queue, but there's so few of us, we're not going to bother doing that. This button lets you turn on your video and there, and this button unmutes your mic. I suggest everyone go and click on the unmute your mic because that sets up the audio channel. Otherwise, it takes a couple seconds to do. And then go down here to the bottom right, and then and that's a local mute. Whereas this one rips apart the network connection each time, which some people preferred because that they could more feel safe that their browser wasn't spying on them. Okay, so the other thing to know is that we have this note-taking tool, and open the notepad in this session. So, and you can participate. It's a Etherpad or hedge doc for there. And if you do, you need to be logged into the data tracker, which you should be already. You can take notes for that. So we're actually I'm going to share my screen and into it. So I'm going to turn this off here. Stop sharing that screen. Go back to presentation view. And then I'm going to share this one. So that lets you see the notes I'm taking live. Otherwise, the note-taking tool is something that you have to pick that particular part, and you may or may not see it. So welcome, everyone, to this virtual interim meeting. So what else did I need to tell you? Oh, the notes are there. There is a chat that you can reach here or through the tab with the two balloons on it on the Meet Echo screen. And they're different interfaces, but they do different things. So next, I need to ask you about any changes to the agenda. Okay. All right. So I need to tell you about the IETF Note Well. And this is just a policy about intellectual property. If you are aware of any, such as patents or other things like that that affect this work, then we ask you to let us know. And if you have any questions about that, then you can ask Jim or I or our area director, which is Murray, who I don't think has joined us today. The next thing is that we have some anti-harassment procedures and a code of conduct, but the short of it is let's just not be nice to each other and try to speak slowly if you have are someone who likes to speak quickly. And let's talk about the arguments, not the people in what we're doing. Okay, so discovered you can put these mermaid diagrams in the hedge doc, and someone did this nice diagram, and this is a kind of how our process works. There's lots of details that are not shown here, but essentially we adopted the document. What was that, about November, December last year, and we started the working group last call. That happened in Jim, was that May? I think it was May, June there. And we actually went out and asked for some very specific reviews from a number of entities, including we got some reviews from, for instance, the Linux libuuid people, and some other people came back with that. There were some changes, and then we went into our area director review, which was Murray. He gave us some feedback, and it went into an IETF last call, and we went through in August through what's known as the IESG review. The IESG is the IETF Engineering Steering Group, or the Internet Engineering Steering Group, and that's 14 managers who basically looked through our document and gave us a lot of feedback on their points. And that's essentially where we are here. You are here. And one of the pieces of feedback was that there was a feeling that we needed a little bit more IANA review. And then the other piece of feedback that we've received through GitHub from, I think, Daniel, is this proposal for UUID version 9. And we're going to come to that issue very shortly. Any questions at this point?
I had one question, just from a process procedure perspective, just so it's written down and recorded. At the moment, we have draft 12 and maybe slated of draft 13. When we're done with that, we say hands off. Does it go back in front of IESG for a full another review, or do we say to those reviewers, hey, we've addressed your problems, can you change your discuss vote to a yes, or just target 2 reviewers?
Usually the latter. We say to them, we've addressed your problems, please change your discuss to a yes or a no comment that way.
Right.
If we were to make significant changes to the document, then that would reset us back to here.
Got it. So significant text changes to the main body of the document. Yep, exactly. Most of our work's been in the appendixes, which kind of is a.
We would ask our area director Murray to please return the document to the working group, and at which point we would have to go through some of the process. Well, it's going to be a little bit lighter because we presumably have made everyone relatively happy. Right. But essentially we would wind up going through that process again.
Yeah, understood. I just wanted to make sure that was in the recordings. If anybody reviews it, they got it. Thank you.
So after the review, we get officially be published, and we go into the RFC editor queue, and that's run by the RFC Production Center, and they do essentially an editorial English pass through the document, and they do some other publication-like things. In the distant history, they would translate the document into NROF, for instance, and now that's XML, and there are some things that they do to that. And at the end of that process, at the very end of that process, what happens is we get to what's called Auth 48, which is the last chance for the authors to read the changes the RPC has done, which are typically, as I say, moving commas and changing double quotes or something, and to say, yes, you haven't made any significant or semantic changes. They are all editorial, and I approve this document, and then it gets published. Comes out as a RFC. And that's basically, we're just waiting for them to get to the top of their queue. And of course they have, somewhere between 50 and 200 documents in their queue at any one time. So it can take, somewhere between 4 and 10 weeks to get to the top of their queue. Okay, so I want to talk about IANA considerations. So let me see, I double clicked. My middle button is often not working well for me. Opens 2 tabs. Okay, so we had this comment from Paul Wouters, who's one of the security area directors. He says, I'm not sure the degree that no IN is required for hash-based IDs. If another document adds new hash-based IDs, there won't be a single document list them all or massive duplication. So that's what he asked, was specifically hash-based IDs. Okay. And I guess he's right based upon how we've used them in the V8 stuff. And but the text change that we got, which is in here. Oh, again, double clicking. Kaiser went, I think, a little bit too far and introduced IDs for all sorts of things, registries for all sorts of things. Okay. So
I just wanted to comment that in the current draft 12, there is no hash space ID. So that kind of the whole discussed topic is moot.
Oh.
But I think that he, in his, if you read between his lines, I think hash space and namespace fall into the same topic of what he wants to discuss, which were both of those. But
okay.
Yeah, hash space is not there anymore. It's gone. So that makes the whole conversation moot. But I think you still have to address namespace IDs because they fall.
It's the same thing.
Argument. Yeah, exactly. That's all I wanted to say.
So Jim and I were looking through this on. We actually couldn't quite understand these four items here at all. Actually, I couldn't understand why. Does this document actually have a? This document doesn't have a UUID attached to it. So we're trying to understand, how does these documents actually relate to these UUIDs that we have here?
Yeah, so the namespaces concept is from the original document. So they're out there in the wild, they're in current implementations, right? The concept of a namespace itself is a unique identifier for names within a namespace. And I put together the known, how did we come to these IDs in the text following the table, which are those bullets of how did we come to those values? How did we get that, right? So these things are used as an input alongside a name, which could be, if we use DNS, which is the most common example, you'd use the namespace ID along with some sort of DNS name concatenated and then into a hashing algorithm, right? So those,
and then it goes into a hash.
An input. Yep, exactly. So they're unique in a way that identify that namespace as, salting for the hash.
So that the URL example.com is different from the DNS name example.com.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. They add some of that salting to it.
Okay. I'm still very confused about this, because when I look at -12 and I search for namespace ID, I see the table of contents, which points to Appendix A. And then there is Appendix A that says, here's some namespace IDs. And then there is nothing else that uses the text namespace ID. So where are we using these?
In V3 and V4, it discusses namespaces. It doesn't specifically say namespace ID, but if you just search for the concept namespace, you'll see it. The original document, this is honestly the problem with the original document. They are very vague about these, and their appendix simply is the table and says, here they are. They're interesting, with no other concept or stuff. So we're fleshing it out a little bit more. I'm fine for adding, a little bit more text around it. If I need to use namespace ID everywhere I use the word namespace, I'm fine with that. But it's the concept of a quote unquote namespace, and then there's the namespace ID that we have.
So this is example UUID version 3 can be by and over a given namespace value. Maybe we need to forward reference here to that appendix.
Yeah, exactly. And I have a line 2 paragraphs down that says common namespaces are in Appendix A. I can just cite Appendix A right there, right? Yeah. I can just move that up as if that makes it better. Okay.
I think so. Now, if it's SHA 256, then we're into version 8, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So there's nothing in here about this because that whole illustrative example is in the appendix. I've moved it out. One of the arguments, and I think it's a good argument, is that since it's all sort of custom vendor-based stuff, we shouldn't have it in the body of the text because we're not. We don't want to say that like this is the only way to do it, or else then you get into the let's put a number on it. If it's just an example of how to do this, a C2, then let's put it in the back end. Let's just show it as an example and make it an example, but it's not normative text. It's not, or at least it shouldn't be using normative text, but it's not like a heavy-handed, like do it this way or be gone. It's just, okay, this is how you can use this. This is a way to do it if you want to do it. So this is more or less the same D5 as a delta.
So I understand that there are different namespaces for things like DNS names and the other things that are listed there. Where is the ID ever actually used? Where do you put that 128-bit number?
Yeah, you put it in.
What do you
as a
what do you do with it?
You concatenate it with the name.
So you take this part and this part, but where does the SHA 256 fit in?
Over the whole thing. So those two concatenated.
But don't we have I thought we had a this is the output, SHA 256 output.
Yeah, exactly. That's the output of those two concatenated.
So why are we making a UUID effectively out of the namespace rather than just registering a string like DNS?
Your guess is as good as mine. The original folks who made this thing eons ago, they chose to make it a UUID. I agree.
Probably my guess is they went that way because they felt that it didn't require a registry.
But it does.
But it kind of does in the end. But if you only have one document, then and based on my understanding of the history of this document, being in DCE and other stuff where they wouldn't have had their own their own IANA. So creating a registry would have been a hardship for them. And that was the whole point of UUIDs, is that you didn't really completely need to do it. So someone could just make up a new thing and create a UUID, and with some high probability it was unique.
That would be my assumption as well, based on the history I know.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please. Jump right in.
Just for my clarification, is this kind of essentially fixing an omission in the original document, or is the reason we're discussing this is because it's referenced in these V8 examples here that we're looking at?
I think it's both.
So the original document, one of the problems of the document was that it focused heavily on version 1, and then everything was version 1, and it kind of glossed over a lot of need to know information on 3 and 5, so that an implementation can do it right, do it correct, right? And this document attempts to fix that by splitting all those things out and then really focusing on, okay, we're going to talk about this version in the context of this version without any other prerequisite knowledge, right? And in doing so, we had to really dig into V3 and V5 and kind of just write a lot of text, because there was just one section on how to do this, but it tied back to 5 other sections that weren't relevant. So hopefully that makes sense, Peter.
Yeah.
I'll state that V8 came out of a fact of mostly the idea that MD5 and SHA-1 these days are somewhat, I'm going to say, legacy algorithms. And there could be a situation where somebody somewhere doesn't want to use those, or their libraries are hardened where they just can't access those types of functions and features. So if they had to have a modern algorithm, how could they solve that checkbox, right? And this example is stating how you can do it. And then it can be extrapolated to other algorithms. Maybe SHA-256 is a good thing. The reason there isn't an actual version is because there's 9 million hashing algorithms, and we can't put a version on each one. And there's not a nice way to solve that. So it's do it in a custom space. Here's an illustrative example. If you want to do something else, that's up to you. That's the kind of the purpose of the version 8. So it checks that checkbox, kind of provides that example without really giving a version number away, because we don't have a ton of them.
So, and a use case, for this is, let's say that I wanted to publish the fact that I'm reachable at example.com, but I don't actually want to say that because it's a private information. But if someone else is reachable at example.com, they would know how to calculate this hash, and therefore would see, oh, it's the same UUID as the one I have, and therefore I can guess that it's the right place. Now, that's not that super privacy. People could run dictionary attacks on that, but it might. I'm just guessing here. That's one example of a DNS thing where I want us to arrive at the same conclusion, but I don't necessarily want to tell you the answer.
Yeah, there's other ones too, where maybe you want a unique identifier for a specific thing, and you want that unique identifier to have some sort of application logic which uses inputs that make sense.
Right.
And a hash-based type thing it makes sense because it's going to be consistent, and other people can calculate it independently and arrive at the same values.
And that's why we need to explain to them what the inputs are, right? And I don't think we've even said here. I think that the UUID goes in as a 128-bit value in big endian format, not going in as a hex number with dashes, right?
Well, the question was, I guess this sort of goes into the later discussion on the version 9, right? Right now we're talking about whether we need IANA registry for something, right? And the original issue was that was discussing whether we need a registry for hash-based IDs, but that has actually been removed from this document. So what we're talking about now, whether we need namespace registration, wasn't actually asked for. So, I mean, we can still do it if somebody wants to do the work, but that wasn't actually asked for. This is just basically being a good citizen or something.
Yeah, exactly. So the current IANA, just taking it back here to IANA conversation, thanks, Peter, is hash bases and namespaces have very, very similar properties. If we ask for hash bases, which don't exist anymore, we should probably also just do namespaces. And that's where we talk about namespaces. That's different than a urine namespace. But the namespace IDs that you saw in the table in the appendix, there's 4 of them. Don't expect to see a lot of them, but they are a thing that, again, based on the properties of this, we want them to be consistent. We want them to be knowable and disseminated to the group, so that the 2 independent parties can, with effective knowledge, generate the same value, because that's one of the properties of this thing. So registering it makes sense. I don't expect to have a ton more, but at least you put it up on a page and you are good, right?
So if the set is the 4 that we've listed and there was really nothing else to list, then we probably don't need a registry at all. And if anyone who also creates them is always going forward, so you never looking at a UUID and asking what namespace this is to belong to. You're always starting from, oh, I'm doing NFS and I need to do this, and this thing is here, and that's it. Then we probably don't need it. The issue is if we expect to see namespace UUIDs or other ones in the wild, and people are likely to go, wait, what is this thing? and how do I interpret it or understand it? Then they need to come back to IANA to a registry to say, well, is it one of the known ones? And that would be the scenario.
Yeah, that's a good point, but I don't think UUIDs are really meant to be used in that sort of reverse direction, right? You can, of course, take a UID and sort of try to take it apart and look at, what address or what timestamp it represents in that, but that's not really.
No,
meant
I'm
to
not
use that,
proposing
right?
that at all. I'm actually saying you would see a complete UUID, all 128 bits, and you would believe that it represents something, and you'd go to IANA and you'd see something. So in the example that we had, right, in this, that's this DNS namespace ID. But of course, you're not seeing that in the wild, right? You're going to see this in the wild, this thing here, right?
Right.
Yeah, the big thing is whatever we put in that section is what the libraries implement. Those 4 values that are in Appendix A are what the libraries implemented, right? And if somebody drafted up a new document and said, I'm going to register 3 more of these things, and they put it in a document, it's going to be in those documents. Now you got 2 documents kicking about. So
right
at that point,
And that's what the registry's for.
Register? Exactly. Yeah. Should, like, theoretically, I can register other ones, and so, like, should we rip the Band-Aid off and just get a table and say and cite, so that if somebody down the road does it, I don't think it's terrible to do. We've already got a lot of text. We just got to clean it up a little bit. It's just a table up for IANA that says, here's these well-known values for this specific purpose within this specific algorithm. I think it's a do it. Honestly, I think we just do it. That's my vote.
I would agree. That one table that's got 4 values. Now, what do you want as to be the amending formula?
Yeah, so that was kind of my logic in these types of things is, okay, well, we got values, we have a table. I feel that we should provide some guidance to those next folks in line who might want to generate a new one, how they do it, and kind of what are the rules. So that was the attempt of, like, kind of describing how these things are generated. And then if I were to do one, like you said, for NFS, right? What value would I pick next? And just kind of pulling it out so that when we have the designated experts down the line, they can use this as okay, is this thing in line with what we should be doing versus I don't know, there's 4 values. I don't know what the logic is behind these, right? That's all that does. It adds a little bit more context to something that in the original doc had 0.
Well, generally, you need to have more restrictive rules about adding things to a registry when you have a limited number of, like a limited bit field. You've only got like 16 values, so you need to be careful about allocating the new ones. In this case, we don't need to be really at all careful about allocating the new ones. I mean, you don't want,
right.
So expert review, or I'm not sure what all of the options are, but I mean, the only problem with expert review is you got to essentially maintain this group of experts, and somebody comes along and IANA has to email all of them in order to say, hey, is this reasonable?
Yeah, and I can see the argument. I've always kind of been a proponent of, if you give too much, it can kind of be overwhelming. Some sort of logic or order makes sense, and just describing the current order and then using it, because there's 4 values and they do have a pattern, and just continuing that pattern and describing it versus somebody else having to try to figure that out. And I think it just helps. That's all it does. It's a description.
So this is the palette of policies that we can specify. Probably don't care about private use or experimental use. Hierarchical allocation makes no sense. So first come, first served is one of them. Now, in theory, that doesn't require expert review, although it seems to wind up all the time with it anyway. Expert review is what we just described. Specification required means any document that's relatively reasonably stable in the IETF or anywhere else is good enough. Then you have RFC required. which doesn't mean that it's a standards action. It could be an independent submission, for instance, or something like that. IETF review, I can't remember what I guess that means you have a document plus something. I can't remember what it means. I have to go read it. Standards action means you have to have a standards action RFC. And then IESG approval is kind of, it doesn't necessarily need a document, is my memory, but requires the ISG. And effectively, standards action is ISG review, because you don't get there without without IESG approval either. So to my mind, either it should be very open, first come, first served, or it should be standards action.
Yeah, I think the current text, I like first come, first serve. I actually don't think I considered that for namespace IDs. I originally had put specification required, mostly because I didn't like the idea of tying it strictly to an RFC, because there's there's a lot of different organizations that have their hands in this type of thing. So I wanted to relax it a little bit. So I went with specification. But if we're just purely talking about namespace IDs in this context, I think first come, first serve makes sense.
But wouldn't you also want to have some kind of specification of what's in that namespace? Otherwise, someone can just say namespace XYZ, but then it doesn't specify anyway what you put stuff in it.
That's where the expert review here, right? So the designated expert review the public specificate whether it's sufficiently stable and permanent, and sufficiently clear and technically sound, right? So
yeah,
you got to
each
say
one of these,
enough.
I think, builds on the previous one. So like if you go back to the table, it's like expert review was before specification required, right? And they kind of build on. So like if you are doing specification required, it means you're doing all of the previous. It's a first come, first serve. It has the expert review. It has this, right? So they wrote the document in a way that it kind of builds on each other. So yeah, there's an expert review. There's text in the document for that type of logic and how an expert might evaluate that. That's when I targeted specification is required. I kind of tried to hit those bullets.
Oh, great. That's funny. So I wrote this document, and here's it as an example. I didn't notice that ever. It was a hard document to write because it was the first time that we ever got a DNS resource record allocated through the new process, through that process. No one knew how to do it. Anyway, so, I mean, we're essentially adding elements to a table. I think that we don't need to lock it down to RFC or IETF. So I would say that specification required is the absolute highest level that we should consider. And first come, first served is, just send an email and you'll get a number, or your number will be there. I guess we're since the table doesn't have any restrictions, people will have to provide their, as I said, for numbers, signs of ecstasy, but value. With names, specific text strings are that's sort of where would be. Any other opinions about what we should do here, assuming that we're going to put an IANA considerations, which I think we have?
I was just going to add, does it help us at all if we mention that we're not planning on adding new values to this? Does that ease the pain at all? If not, fine. I just wanted to throw it out there because it is kind of legacy stuff.
It doesn't really change things. We're either creating the registry or we're not. And having created it, it may never get used. That's maybe a waste of time. But on the other hand, it makes people happier that there's a process for extending this.
I mean, given that the existing namespace IDs are in libraries and stuff like that, I think we have to maintain those. Honestly, I mean, if it wouldn't create a huge inconsistency, I just say, future namespaces will just use the namespace as the ID. But I'm complicating things. Let's just keep it the same. Can I ask though that in the specification where we talk about namespace value and namespace ID, that we pick one term and use it everywhere and not have two?
Yeah,
Because that confused me definitely.
Yeah, I have it in my notes to basically normalize that text. I had already went through once and changed it from name dash space to name space, and like I kind of normalized it once, but I can definitely normalize namespace value to namespace ID and make sure that we definitely call out the ID. So yeah, I can do that.
Thank you.
Actually, the
I guess
text
the only.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Peter. Sorry. Cut you off.
No, just looking at the the green text we're looking at here is that all of these namespaces do actually have refer to a specification. So that seems to imply that kind of what I said earlier. They all kind of give an indication of what you should actually then put into the name if you use that namespace.
Yeah, exactly. That's correct.
Maybe that could put as a column in the table, even as a third column.
Yeah, it wasn't a table at first, but that's a good call out. I can put that in the table. Spec in the table.
Probably, yeah, it has to have a.
Yeah, I can.
So I want to fill in this part here. What is the policy that we would like to use? Somewhere between first come, first served and specification required.
Well, I guess I'm a little bit concerned about having a bunch of namespaces that are defined that we don't know anything about, and essentially IANA just getting a bunch of random requests that says, here, I'd like to register the Jim Fenton namespace. I'm not going to do that, of course, but.
I
So
think
you would
first
prefer
come, first served is
specification
too
required.
loose.
Yeah, just so that we have a point, just so we have a pointer to something that describes how it's going to be used. And we have someone in the queue.
This is Ira. My sense is that also specification required is important in this case, because you really wouldn't want to have one that was ambiguous.
There would be no point in registering it if the details weren't there.
Right.
I don't want it to turn into the Global Star Registry where you can pay somebody $10 and buy a namespace and they'll register it in IANA for you.
I thought that's how we were going to fund future IETF meetings, but okay. So I think what was said is that we needed another column here, which was specification.
Right. I think that isn't that just I think that's always part of an IANA registry, though, that there's a reference.
Think so,
Yeah, for sure. This table specifically wasn't the one that was being registered by IANA, but I'll iron it out. Just add the comment.
Okay.
For you. Okay. I'm going to leave the text underneath just because I think that does help the designated expert. All of that text is, is for the folks who are going to make that spec required. So I'll leave that. I'm not going to touch it. Just
you might even want to throw the words in. You might even want to throw the words in. Advice to experts.
Okay. If we're specification required, do we have designated experts anymore? I don't think we do.
We do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's,
So it's
yeah,
it's
just
a
one-
it's a
one
kind
below
of a
it.
cumulative thing here. This policy is the same as expert review with the additional requirement of a formal specification.
Okay. Got it. You know better than I.
I guess the other
Okay.
topic in that IANA is the thing that I kind of opened the can of worms on, and I do apologize, is if we're going to register IANA stuff, let's consider the whole scope. And
Okay.
not in this thread. This thread went off the rails a little bit, but if you go back to the actual pull request, you can see sections 1 and 2 that are requested of the PR. And I'll give my very brief why in a moment once we get it pulled up on the screen. So ignore that, right here. So not this one, the right above that.
Right.
Yep, exactly. So in the grand scheme of UUIDs as they exist on the internet, there's a lot, like I said earlier, there's a lot of different players. We've got DCE folks, there's ITU specifications, there's ISO specifications, Microsoft's kicking about in this. And I think that if we're going to do this correctly, we should register at the very least the subtypes. Our subtype at IETF is the version. There are
Yes.
other types of things that exist out there that reference to other documents. And in personal experience writing this, it is very hard to find that data. Ours is readily available, but a central registry, which calls out all of the other folks that are playing in the space, makes sense. These are simple. Ours is, again,
Sure.
ours is a version. It goes with our variant bit. Other people have variants, and they have subtypings as well. And I think that we start the table, we can then down the road, somebody else can populate it with their stuff if they see fit as a specification required as well. That, at the very least, I'd like that guy.
I'm a little bit concerned about making sure that we're kind of staying within our lane here in terms of our scope. I mean, if you know, I think, yeah, definitely register version numbers. It would be nice if, you know, we needed to add another version at some point in the future, that we didn't have to completely revise this document, that it could be extended by some other specification. But the so I mean, that would be a reason to have a registry for that. But I'm not sure about you know, trying to register other people's stuff that's outside the
Yeah, Jim, I'm not stating that I'm registering anybody else's in this text or this piece. I am keeping it focused to exactly what we have in our document, and all of those other things aren't there. They're just a part of a consideration as to why would I do this in the first place. This document does not register anything else other than what's in our RFC or this
Okay.
registry. Yep.
So you just want to have a registry of versions 1 through 8, basically.
Yep. I'm just
Yeah.
formatting the text in the table in a way that it's extensible for other folks. I'm being nice.
Right. So if the ITUT comes along and wants to do version 9 or A or, you know, whatever, I would say, so without an amending formula here, then implicitly it winds up being IESG action, right? So IESG approval, okay, there. And you know, the ISG can always do this essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So they would have to come and say, you know, and then the IESG could essentially say, well, this is only like, you know, very few numbers here. You know, we're going to decide what we want you to do. And they could say, publish an RFC, right? Or something like that. Or whatever they want. or we can decide that for them now.
Yeah, if you go back to the table of sort of the increasing hierarchy, I think, not that table, sorry, but go back to the table of contents in the previous document, which has all these different sections. Yeah, this document, yeah.
Yeah,
I
okay.
think that putting the IESG in, which is one of the highest level types of things,
Yes.
is maybe a step too far, right? You're kind of stating just out loud that if you want to do this, you have to go through the IESG body, even though you're a separate standards body or a separate org.
It's happened before.
Is that a bridge? Right, and I'm not saying it hasn't.
But
I'm just saying, is that appropriate, or should we just do standards required like before, which is you got a designated expert, you've got a standard in some body that's freely available, and you're defining your stuff within your scope. You're just writing it down.
well, isn't IESG approval actually slightly lighter than standard required? Because IESG can approve something without an RFC if they want to.
It's orthogonal, I would
haven't
say.
read the
Yeah, I would say
Okay.
it's orthogonal, but you're exactly right. I doubt any ISG will do that.
Right.
Right.
But we're talking about allocating version numbers that are within the variant of IETF stuff. So I don't see any problem with, if somebody else wants to register another version number, then yeah, they should be asking IETF or asking IESG about that.
Well, isn't it? We just said that on the screen. If you make it standards action, you require an RFC.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so you keep it in the IETF world. If somebody wants, I guess we're going to get to that later, right? If we still get to it today, like this V9 that's been tossed around, right? So if we make it standards action for this registry, then somebody can write a new RFC,
Yep.
starting tomorrow on V9, and it will just plug into this. I think this seems
Correct.
pretty nice solution.
Yeah, again, I
If the
think
ITU comes along, I don't think they would get V9 in this space.
right. That's what I'm stating, is for our stuff that we have control over in this table, I think standards action or RFC required makes sense. However, we're talking about the entire registry, which potentially the way it's written could have other people because there's other spaces. And I think it's nice to list that stuff. So stating that you want to get something in this registry, you want to use it, you have to have an RFC. For people who aren't IETF, doesn't make sense. I think that's just, it's a little too strong. And I think specification required, it hits the bill of, okay, I'm ITU, I'm doing something in my variant, but I also want to just call it out as a subtype. Here it is.
So why
ITU could have
this
a
is-
variant, is what you're saying. Is that what I understood?
Yes, there's ways to allocate UUIDs that aren't just IETF's variant, right? There's 4 variants. There's 4 different technical verticals that could exist with different subtyping and logic. And I wrote this section to cover extensibility.
So that's kind of where I was referring to, kind of staying within our lane. I think we ought to have a registry for version numbers. Is somebody proposing that we have a registry for variants or something that is outside of our variant?
Well, okay, let's ask the question. Okay, the ITUT decides they want to use variant E, okay, and at the same time, I don't know, Google decides to do that. Trying to think of something large enough that they would just plow through, right? Who would arbitrate that? Given that the UUID document is an IETF document, so
but the UUID document doesn't cover all uses of UUIDs, because we've got the other variants that are listed there that we don't talk about.
right, but we talk about them enough to say they're out of scope or go here,
right?
And
Well, we can't have a registry for things that are out of scope, right?
No, but we can have a registry that says the following is in use. Don't use it. It's here, right? It's in this. You can't see my fingers. It's over here, right? And we don't say anything furthermore about it.
And that's exactly what
Okay,
it has
so
at
you
the
would
moment
have two
is
different
that.
categories for these two different registries, right? The registries for the versions would have maybe
Yes.
standards action would be appropriate, and the registry for the variants, I guess is the term, right, would have some other level expert review, maybe just that somebody looks at it if it's correct.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying. I think for our stuff, for what we have control over here in the IETF, RFC required, or it makes sense, or because this has this, I think specs required makes sense, right? For other
Well,
stuff,
for the things that are would allocate, say, a new version number, which are in very short supply, I think it really ought to be standards action. Because there are lots of ways to get an RFC. I mean, you could publish an individual submission informative RFC, and you don't want that necessarily to allocate one of our precious version numbers.
I think
Yeah,
we're
that
in
makes
agreement.
sense.
Everyone's in agreement on that. The only question is now, do we need another table for variants?
Does this pull request actually propose any additional registries other than the versions?
Variance is above that. Yeah,
Okay, so
I put variance in there too to cover all of them. And
so that table
I would
already
just as
exists,
soon
we
be.
just have to vote.
I would just as soon be silent on variance.
That's fine. That
But
just means that if there's another
just my
variant
opinion.
that we would have to publish another document, that would be the only way to update this table. And maybe that's appropriate.
Well, I guess I wasn't proposing that we even have a table for variance. I mean, maybe an informative table that says,
well, we
these
do.
at
We
the
do
at
up
the time
here,
of
right? Yeah.
Right. So, we can say at the time of publication, the following variants existed. That isn't a commitment that we're gonna publish something about every variant that somebody might come up with later.
Exactly. There's no way in this table here for anyone to get something allocated if we don't write we're not putting it in a registry. We're not. There's no way of getting things right, except by publishing a new document.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
That's fine. That's consistent with what's in the current documents. So.
Okay, got it. I'll drop variant table. Or drop variant in a registry. Sorry, I'll keep the table. I'll drop the registry from the PO.
Right.
Okay.
Got it. Okay.
So we have about 7 minutes till the end of the hour. I don't know if you want to go past the hour if people have time.
I personally have a hard stop, but I can defer anything to Brad.
I can go for a bit longer. See what happens.
Okay.
I think Daniel's in the queue.
Go ahead.
Okay. I have a question about ITOT. They specified UID version 1 till 5 in their document X77687, and they didn't refer to IETF. And now I wonder, do you need to tell them that version 6 till 8 are defined to avoid that they define it? Because I think the ITOT and IETF document need to be in sync.
That was a conversation in a previous interim that we were going to get with our ITU liaisons so that they know that they can update their document and be in lockstep.
Okay,
don't
I
know if
didn't
that
hear
happened.
that.
I don't know if it happened, but that was it. That was a, I don't know which interim it was, but it was I brought the same point up as well, Daniel.
So, sorry, just to, I guess there's two other points I was going to say is that the ITU hasn't been they don't really have an entity to respond to us at this point. So we can send the liaison comments, and I think they're going into a black hole at this point. So I don't feel very concerned that they're going to do that. But once our document is published, someone there will probably notice and go, oh, and we may get some response back or not. So that document was, the IETF document, the history of it, that they both descend from a DCE document from the 1990s, and they look similar because they have the same historical text, but they actually don't. They didn't interact with each other when they were published. They're common children, don't have a parent ancestor relationship.
I agree with that historical recap.
And we did do some investigation through the liaisons and stuff, and some people pulled some emails from their archives. So I just want to wrap up the registry. IANA reserved UUIDs registry and registration. Well, that was like the nil and stuff. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah,
This is the subtypes. Yeah. So, but we have nil and max, and then we have these four. So does that go to the same place?
When I wrote the registry, I included all of them in there
Okay.
and grouped them all together as a quote unquote like special / reserved type.
So, but would you prefer to just throw them, the nil and max, into the namespace as just saying that they're reserved?
I don't think I want
Because
to
it
muddy
doesn't
up
make
that,
sense to have
that
things
table in the
listed
text
twice.
body.
Yeah, it's a
Pardon
different
me?
usage, I think, from namespaces.
Yeah, they're separate. I don't want to muddy up that other table in the front end.
So this table would just have nil and max?
Yeah.
It's not,
If
it's
I
not
did
clear to
that
me
way.
why we need that, because nil max can be kind of hard coded, and the other ones go in a different registry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Would we ever
I can
extend it
remove
is
that.
what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I can remove nil and max and just say, hey, we're going to use the table from whatever section it is. Yeah, I can do that.
So this is subtype. Do we say RFC required?
Can you show which one that is?
This is the one with the V1 through 0 through 8. Standards action policy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, your agenda has it in the opposite order, yeah.
Sorry, I have it in a bad order. Yeah, sorry about that.
And I was taking notes into a different part of the document, Michael. So
Okay.
we'll need to do some cleanup.
Awesome. Okay, great. Okay. So top of the hour, we've closed the IANA question. So are there? Let me just. Yeah. So we talked about namespaces, IDs. Discusses moot. We talked about allocation. We talked about consistent on namespace versus ID. Any other issues that, Kaiser, you want to bring up from the AD reviews that the group should be aware of?
Nothing on this topic, no.
Well, on any topic from the AD reviews.
Nothing else, no. IANA was all I really wanted to get done today. The big ticket item.
Okay. As with all things that get decided in meetings of this sort, this needs to go back to the mailing list. And we mean the mailing list, not the GitHub forum, because that's the kind of the official place for decisions for IETF working groups is the mailing list. We can certainly have technical discussions on the GitHub forum, but the working group decisions need to be consensus based on mailing list discussion.
Sure.
And one form this will
Daniel,
take is that we will, of course, be posting these minutes to the mailing list. That's why they need to conclude our action items specifically. Anybody else? Any other business? AOB. Any other business stands for.
So we're gonna.
So what is it?
Or.
So based on what we're doing here, what is our next step? Are we going back to working group last call or not? Or how is that decision made?
I don't see a need if we are not adding a V9. I think all of these clarifications are in response to AD reviews. And I think in the end, the amount of text is actually not that much.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that statement.
Yep, I think that works for me. Just wanted to make a clear decision on that.
Okay. Any objections to that?
I have a few other nits and so forth, but I can just do that in GitHub issues or something like that. Don't need to take meeting time for a lot of these.
I mean, I'll just throw in, I think we're all in agreement that we don't want to send it backward if we don't have to. Is this the right time to just ask the question of, are we on the same page? Is everybody in agreement on this V8 example as opposed to doing V9? Are we set on that? We've kind of got the document in that direction. We're in pretty good shape. Is anybody trying to change that, or are we like already set? Like what's in the doc now is fine. And if so, then
I think that's what we're looking for objections. If you object, you need to say so and explain.
And we need to ask that question on the mailing list as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to declare this meeting over.
So I find it a bit
Carsten.
weird to need to call for consensus, not to call for consensus. At some point, this loop needs to stop, and I think this is one of the places where the working group chairs really should make the decision.
Yeah, well, what I'm seeing is that we have consensus of not doing V9, and I think we're just trying to listen carefully to make sure we've heard all the voices.
Yes. But
And
you
we want to
should not-
confirm that on the list.
You should not try to confirm on the list whether you reset to another working group last call. That's your decision.
Yeah, I agree.
And now we can say goodbye.
Okay, good.
Interesting meeting. Thank you.
Thanks.
Interesting, huh?
Yes, if you're interested in process stuff.
That's a Chinese curse, isn't it? It's like a Chinese
Yes.
curse.
That was what I was wondering about.
Yeah, he's damned us. That's what's happened. Oh well. Have a good weekend. We'll be eating turkey in Canada. Americans can catch up.
Yeah, have a good Thanksgiving, Michael.
Thanks. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.